If I told you that right now, a revolution without a single drop of bloodshed is silently tearing apart the very foundation of our global economy, would you believe me? There are no roaring steam engines here. There is no factory smoke, and there are no armies marching in the streets. Instead, there is just a harmless-looking virtual agent sitting quietly behind your screen systematically, dismantling corporate structures that have stood for over 400 years. But that is only half of the terrifying reality. Across the vast Pacific Ocean, through thousands of miles of invisible submarine cables, a new kind of crude oil is being frantically pumped into the global market. It is not a black liquid. It is an invisible, highly compressed digital unit called the token. And it is being exported by the billions, fueled by the massive wind-swept deserts of China. Listen to me carefully. This is not some obscure technological footnote. This is the ultimate code to the greatest wealth redistribution of the next 10 years. It dictates whether you will keep your job, and it reveals exactly who will control the financial empire of the 21st century. Forget everything you thought you knew about money, labor, and power. Welcome to the invisible war. If I were to look you directly in the eyes right now and tell you that a global revolution is currently tearing apart the very fabric of our reality, you would probably just shake your head and laugh. You might be sitting in a premium office cubicle at this exact moment, perhaps on the 35th floor of a gleaming glass skyscraper in a major financial district. You are likely sipping your overpriced morning coffee, comfortably typing away on your mechanical keyboard, and believing with absolute certainty that you hold a respectable, secure, and entirely irreplaceable position in the modern world. You feel shielded by your education, your experience, and the invisible walls of the corporate hierarchy. But I need you to put down your coffee, silence your phone, and listen to me very carefully. You are currently standing at the exact epicenter of the most massive, devastating tectonic shift in human history, and you are completely blissfully oblivious to it. Every few hundred years, the fundamental underlying code of the global economy is brutally and unforgivingly reset. If you look back at the history books, you will notice one common denominator. Past revolutions were never subtle, and they were certainly never quiet. During the Industrial Revolution, the deafening roar of mechanical steam engines shattered the silence of agricultural life. Black, choking coal smoke permanently darkened the skies of London, and angry, displaced workers violently smashed the iron machines that stole their physical livelihoods. When the age of electricity subsequently arrived, massive, terrifying generators tore through the darkness of the night like roaring steel beasts. Countless individuals bled, sweated, and sometimes died beneath the towering high-voltage pylons to build the new grid. Historically, every single time the global financial order was rewritten, every time wealth was forcefully redistributed from the old guard to the new elites, it was accompanied by the deafening roar of conflict, the bitter, unmistakable scent of gunpowder, and the violent overthrow of old, decaying palaces. But this time everything is different. This time there is absolutely no gunpowder. There are no roaring combustion engines. There is no scent of blood in the air. And there are no mobs marching in the streets. Everything is so incredibly, perfectly quiet that it is genuinely terrifying. The ruthless harbinger of this new world order is not a conquering general or a ruthless Wall Street tycoon. It is a completely harmless, looking, entirely virtual entity. For the sake of our discussion, let us call it the artificial intelligence agent, or as some early adopters jokingly referred to it, the little digital crawfish. It just sits there, resting quietly behind the glass of your computer screen. It has no physical body, it possesses no weight, it requires no oxygen, and it makes absolutely no demands. You can casually ask it a few complex questions, instruct it to draft a lengthy, highly nuanced corporate strategy email, or throw a chaotic, disorganized mountain of raw financial data at it, casually asking it to organize a pristine executive-level presentation. It does not roar in frustration. It does not bleed. It does not ask for a promotion. It does not require health insurance. And it certainly does not seek to physically tear down the palaces of the old world. Because of this quiet subservience, you are lulled into a false sense of supreme security. You look at it and think it is just another software update, just another productivity tool designed to make your life a little bit easier. But make no mistake, what it is doing right now, in the background while you sleep is infinitely more dangerous to your way of life than any violent physical uprising ever could be. To truly grasp the magnitude of this threat, we must fundamentally deconstruct an institution you take for granted every single day, the company itself. We need to be absolutely brutally honest about what a company actually is. Fundamentally, a corporation is nothing more than a highly artificial vessel designed for human collaboration. It is a system born out of human limitation. Things that one single person cannot possibly achieve, 10 people working together can. Things that 10 people cannot achieve, 100 people or 1,000 people can. Because of our inherent biological limitations, we invented divisions of labor. We invented complex, multi-layered workflows. We invented massive, convoluted organizational charts, and we invented key performance indicators. We built an entire elaborate, incredibly expensive societal system designed solely to force strangers to work together efficiently. A company is simply a machine built to amplify individual human capabilities, and white-collar workers are simply the biological cogs within that massive machine. But ask yourself a terrifying question. What happens when the machine no longer needs those biological cogs? What happens when the artificial intelligence agent can instantly process the data, write the report, and formulate the strategy in a fraction of a second? The evaporation of 10 or 20 mid-level management positions is merely the superficial symptom. When a company's fundamental demand for mid-level human labor is permanently compressed on a massive systemic scale, does the company itself even need to exist in its current, bloated form? We are watching the quiet, systemic assassination of the traditional corporate structure, and it is happening right in front of our eyes. However, if you think this story is simply about a few white-collar workers losing their comfortable jobs, your imagination is far too limited, and you are entirely missing the larger macroeconomic picture. To understand the true endgame of this revolution, we must dramatically zoom out. We must lift our eyes from our glowing screens, look across the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, and examine the geopolitical chessboard. Look at China. China is, without a single shadow of a doubt, the undisputed #1 power-generating nation on the entire planet. By the time we reach the year 2025 or 2026, their total power generation is projected to be so astronomically high that it practically equals the combined output of the United States, the European Union, and India. Their installed capacity for wind and solar power has dominated the global rankings for years. But for a very long time, they have faced a deeply frustrating, almost humiliating physical dilemma. They generate far too much power, and it simply cannot be consumed. Because electricity cannot be easily stored on a massive scale, and it certainly cannot be boxed up and shipped across the ocean like physical manufactured goods. Massive amounts of precious green energy generated in the remote western regions are tragically wasted. They are forced to actively shut down wind turbines and disconnect solar panels, a painful reality the industry desperately refers to as the abandonment of wind and light. Imagine the sheer irony of their situation. They are sitting on the absolute largest gold mine of raw, clean energy in human history, but the gold is simply too heavy to move. It is geographically trapped. They could only sit there and watch it dissipate into the desert air, completely worthless. Until one day, a revolutionary, almost alien concept descended upon the technological landscape. It was a concept that perfectly, flawlessly bridged the gap between the invisible destruction of the white-collar worker in the West and the massive stranded energy reserves in the deserts of the East. It provided the ultimate mechanism to package, transport, and monetize that wasted energy. That concept is called the token. This is not some obscure, irrelevant technical footnote meant only for software engineers to debate in dark forums. It is the absolute core, the very beating heart of the new global economy. The token is the basic semantic unit that artificial intelligence models use to deconstruct, understand, and generate human language, code, and images. When you ask an artificial intelligence to write a simple recipe or analyze a financial trend, it does not read the words like a human does. It breaks your prompt down into these tiny, calculable fragments called tokens. And here is the absolute crux of the matter. Processing these tokens requires computational power. and generating computational power requires staggering, mind-bending amounts of electricity. China suddenly realized they no longer needed to figure out how to ship raw electricity across the ocean. Instead, they could feed that incredibly cheap, virtually limitless desert energy directly into massive clusters of graphics processing units. They could use the electricity to fuel the computational engines, compress that raw power into pure, highly valuable digital intelligence, measure it precisely by the token, and then export those tokens to the rest of the entire world at the speed of light. The bloodless revolution happening in your quiet office and the monumental geopolitical power shift happening in the remote Asian deserts are deeply, inextricably connected by this single, invisible digital thread. The token has officially become the digital equivalent of a highly compressed barrel of crude oil, and it is quietly rewriting the rules of global dominance. The game has changed forever. The old rules have been permanently burned to ashes, and the greatest harvest of human intellect and global wealth has officially begun. Chapter 2. In this chapter, we meticulously lay out the dual foundation of the impending global economic reset. We first dive deep into the tragic reality of the carbon-based economy, examining how the traditional corporate structure operates on a fundamentally flawed premise: the purchasing of irreversible, finite human time. By dissecting the daily life of an average worker, we expose the inherent biological inefficiencies of human labor. We then abruptly shift our macro perspective to the vast wind-swept deserts of China, revealing a spectacular but frustrating geopolitical paradox. Despite possessing the world's most dominant green energy infrastructure and generating trillions of kilowatt-hours of power, China faces the insurmountable physical barrier of energy transportation, leading to catastrophic amounts of wasted electricity. This chapter perfectly juxtaposes the severe scarcity of human time with the trapped abundance of electrical power, setting the exact stage for the revolutionary digital solution that will violently collide these two disconnected worlds. Welcome back. Before we introduce the ultimate technological catalyst that is about to permanently rewrite the rules of global wealth, we must first deeply understand the broken foundations of the world we currently inhabit. We have to critically examine the two greatest, most tragic inefficiencies in modern human civilization. One is happening right now inside your perfectly climate-controlled office building. The other is happening thousands of miles away, in the middle of a desolate, howling desert. And surprisingly, despite being separated by oceans and industries, they are two sides of the exact same coin. Let us begin by critically examining the most widely accepted, yet deeply flawed illusion in the entire history of human civilization: the concept of your monthly salary. Have you ever actually stopped to think about what a company is truly buying when they deposit money into your bank account every 30 days? You might arrogantly think they are buying your unique creativity, your strategic intelligence, or your unparalleled ability to generate polished financial reports, but you would be entirely wrong. Let me tell you the story of a man named Wang Fugi, who runs a typical fast-paced e-commerce company. Every single day, his business requires a brand new promotional poster to effectively sell his products online. In the old world, the world we are rapidly leaving behind right now, he employed a human graphic designer. This human designer was paid a standard monthly salary of 9,000 Chinese yuan, on average, managing the complexities of software and his own creative process. This designer could produce exactly one high-quality poster per Dalton Y, which meant the absolute baseline cost of every single poster was roughly 300 Chinese yuan. But what was Wang Fugi actually purchasing for those 300 Chinese yuan? In the carbon-based human world, there is an unavoidable, deeply tragic, and philosophically terrifying fact. Life is consumed in a single, irreversible direction. A graphic designer, no matter how brilliant, only has 24 hours in a single day. If he spends his finite energy making this specific promotional poster today, it is physically and biologically impossible for him to simultaneously make another one at the exact same moment. Therefore, when the boss pays him his wage, he is not really buying a piece of digital art. He is purchasing a fragment of this biological organism's irreversible lifespan. Working for 8 hours essentially means you are taking exactly 8 hours of your finite precious life and selling it to the corporate machine. Consider the sheer arrogance of the traditional corporate architecture. We built glass towers reaching into the clouds, filled them with millions of individuals, and established incredibly intricate hierarchies just to process information. The analyst, the manager, the director, they are all essentially biological processors, reading data, interpreting patterns, and outputting decisions. But human brains are staggeringly expensive to maintain, and the corporation is acutely aware of a frustrating reality. Within those 8 hours of purchase time, not every single minute yields effective, high-quality output. That block of purchase time inherently includes moments of daydreaming, severe emotional fluctuations, psychological fatigue, the need to socialize, and the inevitable tendency to slack off. In the carbon-based world, these biological losses and inefficiencies are completely unavoidable. Because of this undeniable biological limitation, the entire economic cost calculation of our past society was fundamentally based on one singular unyielding metric: time. Human labor compensation is almost exclusively calculated by time. Whether you are clocking in for an hourly wage or receiving a fixed monthly salary, time is the ultimate anchor of the old economy. You sell your time because time is the only truly scarce resource you possess, and the corporation buys it because they have no other alternative. But what if time was suddenly completely removed from the economic equation? Keep that terrifying thought lingering in the back of your mind, because to truly understand the sheer scale of the impending revolution, we must abruptly shift our gaze away from the microscopic tragedy of the human worker. We must look toward a colossal, macro-level paradox. We must look at a problem of pure physical energy. Let us cross the ocean and look at China. Right now, China is the global, undisputed, #1 power-generating nation on Earth. Their scale of infrastructure is so massive, it practically defies basic human comprehension. By the time we reach the year 2025, their total annual power generation is officially projected to exceed a staggering 9 trillion kilowatt-hours. To put that astronomical number into proper perspective, that is practically the equivalent of the combined power generation of the United States, the European Union, and India all put together, accounting for a full 1/3 of the total global power generation. Furthermore, their installed capacity for wind and solar power has consistently, relentlessly ranked first in the entire world for many consecutive years. Think about the sheer scale of the Gobi Desert. Endless horizons of sand and wind, a place that for thousands of years was considered barren, hostile, and utterly devoid of economic value. Yet today, it has been transformed into the ultimate engine of the future. The wind howls across the plains with terrifying force, spinning tens of thousands of colossal turbines, each blade longer than a commercial airliner. The sun beats down with relentless intensity, absorbed by millions upon millions of dark silicon panels that stretch as far as the human eye can see. They have successfully conquered the elements. They have tapped into the infinite battery of the Earth itself. But there is a massive, incredibly frustrating problem that haunts their engineers. There is simply too much electricity, and it cannot be fully consumed. Even after executing monumental engineering feats like transmitting power from the desolate west to the heavily populated east, there still remains a massive, uncontrollable surplus. Why? Because humanity has not yet mastered the physics of massive-scale battery technology, because the cost of storing electricity remains prohibitively high. The operators of these massive green energy grids are left with agonizing, helpless solutions. When the grid is critically overloaded with power that nobody is using, they either have to artificially lower the power generation output, forcing the towering wind turbines and the endless oceans of solar panels to physically stop operating, or they are forced to blindly send the precious power to highly energy-intensive, heavily polluting industries like electrolytic aluminum and metallurgy just to burn it off. When there is absolutely no other way to balance the grid, they can only watch helplessly as the generated green electricity is completely tragically wasted. In the energy sector, this deeply painful phenomenon is commonly referred to as the abandonment of wind and light. Now, a logical person might ask a very simple question. Since there is so much excess electricity, since the turbines are spinning and generating incredible power that nobody in the immediate vicinity needs, why not just sell it directly abroad to countries that are desperate for cheap energy? It is a brilliant thought, but there is a brutal physical barrier. It is not that they do not want to sell it, it is simply physically impossible. Electricity cannot be stored in massive, easily movable quantities, nor can it be boxed up and loaded onto massive cargo ships for international transportation across the sea. Imagine the sheer geopolitical agony of this situation. It is exactly like holding the absolute largest gold mine in the world directly in your hands. But because the gold is too heavy to transport over the mountains, you can only pile it up in your own backyard and stare at it. You possess infinite wealth, but that wealth is geographically imprisoned by the unforgiving laws of physics. So, let us take a step back and look at the global chessboard as it stands right now. On one side of the world, we have the modern corporate economy, choking on the high costs of human labor, paying astronomical prices for the finite, highly inefficient, irreversible time of carbon-based workers. On the exact opposite side of the world, we have an unprecedented, almost limitless overabundance of the cheapest green energy in human history, completely trapped in the desert, unable to be moved, and tragically going to waste. We have a massive deficit of cheap cognitive labor and a massive surplus of trapped physical energy. For decades, these two massive inefficiencies existed completely parallel to each other. They belonged to two totally different industries. One belonged to human resources and corporate management. The other belonged to power grids and infrastructure engineering. Nobody ever thought they would intersect. But history is driven by violent convergence. What if I told you that an invisible bridge is currently being built between these two isolated worlds? What if the solution to the high cost of human thought is exactly the same as the solution to the trapped energy of the desert? The old rules are about to be entirely annihilated. We are standing on the precipice of a technological singularity that will take the wasted electricity of the East, transmute it into pure, unadulterated cognitive power, and use it to instantly replace the expensive, time-bound human labor of the West. The missing link, the philosopher's stone of the 21st century, has finally been forged, and in the next chapter, I will show you exactly how this invisible alchemy works. Chapter 3. In this chapter, we plunge into the terrifying cognitive subversion that bridges the gap between the modern office and the massive energy grids. We dismantle the illusion of human-machine interaction, revealing that artificial intelligence does not understand our language, but rather shatters it into calculable fragments known as tokens. By fundamentally shifting the economic metric of cost from a biological function of time to a cold, ruthless function of computational consumption, we expose the true nature of the token economy. The machine does not experience time. It does not feel fatigue, and it does not sell its lifespan. It merely consumes resources, completely obliterating the foundational pricing system of human labor that has governed our society for centuries. Welcome to the ultimate paradigm shift. If you want to survive the brutal economic restructuring of the next decade, you must immediately abandon every romantic notion you hold about technology. You must stop looking at the glowing screen on your desk as a sophisticated typewriter or an advanced search engine. We need to dissect the actual terrifying mechanics of what happens when human biology attempts to communicate with cold, unfeeling mathematics. Imagine for a moment a perfectly mundane scenario. One day, you are sitting quietly in your office, staring at your screen, and you type a simple, profoundly human phrase into your artificial intelligence interface. I love you. You hit the enter key, the screen flashes for a fraction of a second, and the artificial intelligence begins to type a thoughtful, seemingly empathetic reply. When the machine replies, it looks like a completely ordinary conversation. You feel a fleeting sense of connection. You subconsciously project humanity onto the blinking cursor. But behind that glass screen, a phenomenally complex and utterly alien calculation is taking place. We must shatter this comforting illusion right now. In the eyes of the artificial intelligence, it simply does not recognize human natural language. It does not understand the emotional weight of your words. It does not comprehend poetry, and it does not feel the tragic romance of human existence. To a machine whose entire universe consists only of zeros and ones, human language is nothing more than chaotic noise. Its brain only contains segments of signals, which are disassembled into smaller, calculable units. In order to process your request, the machine must brutally butcher your human language. It takes your profound emotional sentence and aggressively chops it up into mathematical fragments. These smallest units have a specific name, the token. What exactly is a token? Let us conduct a very simple yet deeply revealing test. The Chinese phrase for I love you consists of 3 tokens, and the English phrase I love you also consists of 3 tokens. The token is not a letter, it is not a traditional syllable, and the token is not a word. It is the minimum unit of measurement used by the model to understand the world. It is the fundamental atomic structure of machine intelligence. It dismantles human language into fragments that the machine can comprehend. When you hear this, you might roll your eyes. You might think this is just a tedious, irrelevant technical detail meant only for software engineers, and you might wonder why I am wasting your time explaining it. I am explaining it because it is the most dangerously important concept you will ever learn. When you input a sentence, those tokens are mathematically calculated by the massive, invisible model hovering in the digital ether. And when the artificial intelligence begins to formulate its reply to you, it meticulously generates those tokens, one by one, constructing an alien simulation of human thought. Therefore, human interaction with artificial intelligence is essentially a continuous flow of tokens. And in the realm of economics, a continuous flow inevitably means one thing: consumption. To grasp the terrifying financial implications of this consumption, let us return to our previous example of Wang Fugui and his fast-paced e-commerce company. Remember the human graphic designer who painstakingly crafted a single promotional poster every single day. That biological worker cost roughly 300 yuan per poster. But then, the digital revolution arrived at Wang Fugui's doorstep. When he switched to using artificial intelligence, the exact same poster was completed in less than 1 minute, with almost 0 time cost. The final artistic result, the actual commercial value brought by the poster, showed no massive difference from the human-made version. So, a profound economic question arises when the sheer volume of work output can be accurately measured by tokens. How on earth do we determine its true cost and market price? What is the actual financial cost of this artificially generated poster? You might naively laugh and say the cost is absolutely 0, because currently so many artificial intelligence tools are seemingly provided to the public for free. You type a prompt, and the image magically appears without your credit card being charged. But this is the greatest, most dangerous misunderstanding of the modern era. Free access absolutely does not mean there is no fundamental cost. These services only appear free right now because deep-pocketed venture capitalists and massive tech platforms are heavily subsidizing your usage, paying the bill on your behalf to aggressively capture market share. We must look past the illusion of the free interface. The data centers behind these massive models are relentlessly burning electricity. The silicon processors are continuously running complex, power-hungry inference calculations. Every generation of an image, every single line of code written by the machine is consuming actual physical resources. Therefore, the fundamental cost of this new poster is not 0. It is measured precisely by how many tokens were consumed to generate it. This brings us to the most critical, earth-shattering realization of this entire video. If you only remember one thing I say today, let it be this. We arrive at a tremendously important conclusion. Economic cost has transitioned from a function of time to a function of calculation. If you truly sit in silence and think about the gravity of this shift, you will realize how absolutely terrifying it is. In the past, human labor was almost exclusively calculated by time, because human life is consumed in a single, irreversible direction. The entire economic foundation of human society was built entirely upon the tragic biological decay of the human body. When Wang Fugui handed over 300 yuan to his designer, he was not buying an image. The biological designer cannot simultaneously create 2 posters. The company is buying a block of his irreversible lifespan, fully aware that this carbon-based process includes unavoidable losses, like spacing out and emotional fatigue. In the carbon-based world, these biological losses and inefficiencies are completely unavoidable, but the artificial intelligence completely overturns this reality. The machine does not sell time, and it does not even possess the concept of time. It exists outside the linear decay of human biology. It never gets fatigued, it never rests, it never feels anxious, and it will never produce less output because it is in a bad mood. It only does one singular, relentless thing: calculation. When the artificial intelligence generates a poster for Wang Fugui, it does not experience the concept of working for 1 minute. It only does one singular thing. It consumes a segment of tokens. Do you understand what this means for your future? If your value to society is currently based on the fact that you show up for 8 hours a day, your value is about to plummet to absolute zero. You are competing against an entity that does not experience the passage of time, does not require biological sustenance, and measures its effort only in the cold, mathematical consumption of electrical tokens. This is not just a technological upgrade. This is the complete reconstruction of the underlying price system of our entire world. This is the true token economy. If you mistakenly believe that this revolution merely makes generating a marketing poster slightly cheaper, you are catastrophically underestimating the magnitude of what is coming. We are not just making things cheaper, we are entirely redefining the fundamental meaning of work, the value of thought, and the ultimate source of economic power. The token is the new currency of existence, and those who do not understand its mechanics will be swept away by the tide. Chapter 4. In this chapter, we explore the terrifying birth of a completely alien business structure, the atomized company. By dissecting the hidden costs of modern consumer products, we reveal how the intellectual premium, the massive markup we historically paid for elite human thought, is being aggressively stripped away. As human cognitive labor is systematically reduced to a standardized, measurable utility exactly like tap water or electricity, the traditional corporate hierarchy collapses. We paint a vivid, chilling picture of a near future where elite, towering skyscrapers stand empty, replaced by hyper-efficient microcorporations consisting of merely 1 or 2 carbon-based humans directing a massive, invisible swarm of tireless artificial intelligence agents. We have established that the fundamental anchor of economic cost has brutally shifted from human time to machine calculation. Now, we must examine the devastating, real-world consequences of this shift. If you think the industrialization of thought simply means your marketing department will save a few dollars on graphic design, you are blinding yourself to the approaching hurricane. We are about to witness the birth of a terrifying new species in the economic ecosystem, and it will fundamentally wipe out the corporate structures you have spent your entire life trying to climb. To truly understand this, I want you to take your smartphone out of your pocket. Imagine it is the absolute latest, top-tier model, the kind that costs somewhere around 7,999 units of currency. If you were to violently smash that phone open and meticulously separate every single physical component, the glass screen, the lithium battery, the titanium casing, the microscopic camera lenses, you would discover a very fascinating economic reality. The raw physical materials combined might only be worth 3,000. The actual factory assembly, the physical human labor required to screw those pieces together on a factory floor, might only cost a few dozen. So, I ask you a very simple question. Where exactly did the remaining 4,000 go? Why are you paying such an astronomical markup for pieces of glass and metal? The answer is profound. You are not paying for the physical object itself. You are paying for the invisible, agonizing process of human thought. You are paying for the architectural design of the microchip, the optimization of the software ecosystem, the millions of lines of code, and the brilliant industrial design. You are buying the cognitive output of the absolute highest-tier human brains on the planet. Economists call this the intellectual premium. For decades, this intellectual premium was the absolute holy grail of the modern economy. The entire goal of higher education and corporate strategy was to capture this premium, but right now, under the crushing weight of the token economy, this intellectual premium is evaporating. Let us apply the logic of our token consumption to the creation of that smartphone. In the old world, the world of yesterday, designing a complex software module required 50 highly educated human engineers. It required them to sit in endless, agonizing boardroom meetings. It required 3 full months of arguing, prototyping, making mistakes, feeling stressed, and drinking massive amounts of coffee. It was a chaotic, biologically inefficient process. But in the new world, this entire human theater is completely bypassed. A master architect simply inputs a highly complex, meticulously structured prompt into the artificial intelligence model. Instantly, the massive servers in the remote desert begin to roar. The model begins to run, consuming oceans of tokens in a matter of seconds. The software module is generated, flawless and optimized. Do you realize what has just happened? The process of deep human thinking has been brutally efficiently industrialized. A process that once required the collective, agonizing effort of 50 elite minds over 3 months has been condensed into a momentary burst of mathematical computation. Because of this terrifying reality, the entire foundational philosophy of business is fracturing. First, the very definition of efficiency has been completely rewritten. In the past, improving efficiency meant finding ways to make human beings work slightly faster, in slightly less time, ultimately to maximize profit margins. But in the universe of the token, human time is completely irrelevant. Time is no longer the bottleneck of production. Second, the absolute core of market competition has fundamentally changed. What did traditional corporations compete on? They competed on recruiting the best human talent. They competed on building the best corporate culture. They competed on which team was willing to work harder, stay later, and sacrifice more of their personal lives. But starting right now, the entire battlefield has shifted. The competition is no longer about human capital. It is entirely about computational power. It is about who possesses the most advanced algorithms and who can generate the most intelligent tokens at the absolute lowest cost. This brings us to the birth of a monstrous new economic entity. I call it the atomized company. Imagine a highly profitable, incredibly aggressive corporation operating in the near future. How many employees does it have? Not 500, not 50. It consists of exactly 1 to 3 carbon-based biological entities. These human founders are essentially just conductors of a digital orchestra. Beneath them, they command a massive, invisible swarm of dozens, perhaps hundreds, of artificial intelligence agents, the tireless little digital crawfish. This microscopic entity can serve hundreds of high-paying corporate clients, generating millions in annual revenue. Think about the sheer terrifying advantage of this atomized company. They do not need a human resources department, because there are no humans to manage. They do not need to cultivate a toxic corporate culture. They do not need to organize team-building retreats to boost morale, and they certainly do not need to conduct annual performance reviews. The artificial agents do not complain. They do not ask for a raise, and they never threaten to quit and join a competitor. The atomized company is incredibly light, devastatingly fast, and its marginal cost of production is so breathtakingly low that it will make traditional corporate executives wake up in cold sweats. And this invisible revolution will manifest in the physical world in a very visible, very tragic way. Think about the most expensive, highly coveted commercial real estate in the world. Think about the towering glass skyscrapers in the financial districts of London, the endless grids of cubicles in the central business districts of Beijing and Shanghai, and the prestigious corner offices of Wall Street. These buildings were once monuments to human economic power. They were the battlegrounds where millions of carbon-based workers squeezed into subway cars every single morning, desperate to occupy a tiny square of desk space. In the very near future, we will watch those magnificent towers empty out, slowly at first, and then all at once, like a receding tide. The atomized company simply does not require a fixed physical location. The 3 carbon-based founders can operate from a coffee shop, a living room, or a beach halfway across the world. And their army of artificial agents, they certainly do not need a window seat. They do not require air conditioning or ergonomic chairs. Even if you confine the servers to a dark, damp, subterranean basement, the agents will silently and perfectly execute their tasks without a single whisper of complaint. The physical infrastructure of the corporate world is becoming obsolete, but the most profound, the most deeply unsettling change is the final psychological subversion. We are witnessing the ultimate standardization of human labor. In the past, every piece of human work carried a unique signature. Every report, every design, every line of code possessed slight variations, human errors, and the distinct stylistic flavor of the biological mind that created it. But moving forward, an overwhelming majority of intellectual labor will be entirely reduced to a standardized mathematical computational process. What does this actually mean? It means that cognitive brainpower has been reduced to a basic utility. It has become exactly the same as tap water or electricity. Think about how you interact with utilities in your daily life. When you walk into your kitchen and turn on the faucet, clean water immediately flows out. You do not spend a single second thinking about the massive concrete reservoir in the mountains, the complex filtration systems, or the human engineers managing the water pressure. You only care about one thing: looking at the water meter and paying your monthly bill based on the exact tonnage of water you consumed. When you flip a light switch, you do not care whether the electricity was generated by a coal plant or a wind turbine. You only care about the kilowatt hours on your meter. The artificial intelligence revolution is transforming office labor into the exact same invisible utility. In the old world, to acquire intellectual labor, you had to endure the agonizing process of interviewing candidates, negotiating salaries, managing human emotions, and navigating office politics. Now, you simply type a command into an interface, and the perfect intellectual result flows out immediately. You do not need to know what happened in the dark space between your prompt and the final output. You do not care which server processed it. You only need to know one thing: how many tokens were consumed to generate this thought, and what is the exact financial cost of those tokens. The human mind, the very thing we believed made us special, the very foundation of our middle-class pride, has been standardized, commodified, and metered. You are no longer competing against other humans. You are competing against the utility company of thought. And in the next chapter, we will reveal exactly who controls the massive power plants of this new digital utility and how a geopolitical masterstroke is turning this abstract concept into the ultimate weapon of global dominance. Chapter 5. We have stared into the abyss of the atomized company and witnessed the impending slaughter of the white-collar working class. We have established, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that human thought is being violently commodified into a measurable, mathematical utility. But a chilling question remains: who exactly owns the utility company? Who controls the massive, humming power plants of human cognition? To answer this, we must completely shatter your conventional understanding of international trade, global supply chains, and the fundamental nature of geopolitical power. We are about to witness the most spectacular, perfectly executed macroeconomic pivot of the 21st century. For the past 40 years, the global economic order was built on a very specific, highly physical foundation. If you wanted to understand the rise of the East, you only needed to look at the massive shipping ports. The traditional model of wealth generation was entirely obsessed with atoms and physical matter. A country would import raw materials, utilize cheap human labor in massive sprawling factories to manufacture physical goods, pack those goods into corrugated cardboard boxes, load those boxes into massive steel shipping containers, and send those containers on agonizingly slow diesel, burning cargo ships across the ocean. Whether they were exporting cheap plastic toys, household appliances, sophisticated smartphones, or the latest generation of electric vehicles, the underlying logic was exactly the same. It was a trade of physical mass. But physical mass has a fatal vulnerability in the arena of global politics. Physical goods can be stopped. When a cargo ship arrives at a foreign port, it must drop its anchor, wait for customs inspections, and navigate an incredibly hostile labyrinth of international trade laws. Physical goods are highly susceptible to punishing tariffs, aggressive trade wars, and arbitrary geopolitical blockades. You can slap a 100% tariff on an electric vehicle, effectively destroying its market viability overnight. The old world of exporting physical matter is fraught with friction, restriction, and vulnerability. Now, I want you to completely erase that image from your mind. Forget the factories, forget the cargo ships, and forget the shipping containers. The new ultimate export does not travel on the surface of the ocean. It travels beneath it at the absolute speed of light. Let us return to the vast, howling deserts of northwestern China, where we previously discovered the tragic abandonment of practically infinite, dirt-cheap green electricity. For years, the master planners stared at this trapped energy, desperately trying to figure out how to monetize it on a global scale. And then, the artificial intelligence revolution handed them the ultimate vessel, the token. This is the genius of the geopolitical masterstroke. According to the current rules established by the World Trade Organization, electronic transmissions across international borders are temporarily entirely exempt from customs duties. There are no steel shipping containers to inspect. There are no massive cargo vessels waiting at the docks in California. There are absolutely no customs declaration forms to fill out, and there are no tariffs to pay. Instead, a completely invisible, frictionless transaction takes place. Imagine a brilliant, highly paid software developer sitting in a sleek office in Silicon Valley. He needs an artificial intelligence model to debug a complex piece of code or generate a vast dataset. He types his command and hits the Enter key. Instantly, his request is shattered into digital fragments. Those fragments dive into the submarine fiber optic cables stretching across the floor of the Pacific Ocean. In a fraction of a second, that data arrives at a massive, heavily fortified computing center located in the middle of the Chinese Gobi Desert. Inside that data center, thousands of advanced graphics processing units suddenly roar to life. And what is powering those processors? It is the incredibly cheap, previously wasted wind and solar electricity of the desert. The processors consume that physical electricity, perform the complex mathematical reasoning required by the Silicon Valley developer, package the cognitive result into a series of tokens, and fire it back across the ocean. The answer appears on the developer's screen in San Francisco practically instantaneously. Absolutely zero physical oil was burned for transportation. Not a single copper wire crossed a physical border. No customs agent ever stamped a passport. But the underlying intrinsic value of the Chinese electrical grid has just successfully completed a cross-border delivery. The electricity has put on a digital disguise, wrapped itself in the invisible cloak of data, and marched straight into the global market. They are taking wind power that is worth practically nothing in the middle of nowhere, pumping it into silicon chips, extracting pure cognitive intelligence, and selling it to the West for hard currency. This is the ultimate arbitrage. This is electricity changing its physical form to conquer the world, and the global market is absolutely devouring it. Why? Because in the brutal, hyper-competitive world of technology, loyalty means absolutely nothing, and cost efficiency is the only god that matters. Let us look at the cold, hard, indisputable data. If you examine the global token consumption volume for the top artificial intelligence models in February of a recent year, the numbers are absolutely staggering. The total global consumption reached 28.7 trillion tokens. Out of that massive pie, Chinese models contributed 14.69 trillion tokens. That is over 51.2% of the total volume, marking the very first time they officially surpassed the models produced by the United States. But here is the detail that will truly make your blood run cold. Where is that massive demand coming from? You might assume it is just domestic Chinese companies using their own software. You would be dead wrong. Nearly 47% of the users calling those Chinese application programming interfaces are actually located inside the United States. Why are the brightest minds in North America and Europe actively abandoning the legendary, heavily hyped models built by the trillion-dollar giants of Silicon Valley? Why are they turning their backs on the very companies that invented this technology? The answer boils down to three simple words: extreme cost performance. While the absolute cutting-edge models from Silicon Valley might possess a razor-thin, marginal advantage in handling the most esoteric, complex logic puzzles, the moment you factor in the financial cost of running a business, the Chinese advantage becomes a devastating avalanche. To understand why, you must look at the base cost of the utility, the electricity itself. In countries like Germany, the cost of industrial electricity is cripplingly high, often converting to nearly 2 Chinese yuan for every single kilowatt-hour. Even in the United States, powering massive server farms is a highly expensive endeavor. But in the desolate northwest of China, the dedicated industrial power rates, specifically subsidized for computing centers, can be pushed down to an unbelievable 0.15 yuan per kilowatt. It is the single greatest electricity price depression on the entire planet. Because the raw fuel of cognition is practically free, the market pricing of the final product is a bloodbath. When you look at the top-tier Chinese open-source models, the cost to output 1 million tokens is roughly 1 to 2 Chinese yuan. Compared to the pricing structures of the dominant Silicon Valley tech giants, the Chinese models are cheaper by a factor of 10. In some specific cases, the pricing of these foreign application programming interfaces is nearly 30 times cheaper than their American counterparts. 30 times. In a capitalist system, A 30-fold price advantage is not just a competitive edge, it is an absolute massacre. The developers of the world are voting with their wallets. They are choosing the cheapest, most efficient digital utility available. Recent statistics have shown that out of the top 5 models dominating the global weekly token invocation charts, 4 of them are entirely Chinese-developed platforms, occasionally capturing a staggering 61% of the total market share. They have rapidly transitioned from being global followers, trying to reverse engineer Western technology, to becoming the absolute dictators of pricing in the global, cost-sensitive intelligence market. And you must understand that this terrifying momentum is merely the opening act of the play. The top executives in the semiconductor industry have already publicly declared that the era of the autonomous artificial intelligence agent has officially arrived. In the very near future, when an agent is tasked with executing a complex, multi-step objective without human supervision, the amount of tokens consumed will not just double. It is projected to explode by 10 to 50 times its current volume. Financial institutions and market analysts are currently forecasting that, by the time we reach the year 2030, the global demand for token consumption in the field of artificial intelligence reasoning will experience a mind-bending growth, multiple of nearly 370 times. We are witnessing the greatest transformation of national identity in modern economic history. For decades, the world viewed China strictly as a massive, sweating industrial giant, a nation that relied on physical exertion to export televisions, sneakers, and solar panels. But that era is effectively over. They are currently undergoing an aggressive radical metamorphosis. They are shedding their physical industrial skin and emerging as something entirely new and far more formidable. They are pivoting from an industrial nation that exports physical commodities to an intelligent computing nation that exports the very essence of thought. When a startup in London uses an artificial intelligence model to automatically handle tens of thousands of customer service complaints, and when a programmer in Austin uses an interface to generate thousands of lines of complex Python code, every single token they burn is powered by the howling winds of Inner Mongolia and the blistering sun of Ningxia. A kilowatt-hour of electricity that was virtually worthless in the desert is being digitally refined, transported across the globe without a single tariff, and sold at a massive, unprecedented premium. They are no longer just participating in the global supply chain. They are aggressively rewriting the foundational code of the global economy. But as this new power structure solidifies, a much darker, far more insidious reality is beginning to emerge. This is not just a story of technological triumph or brilliant energy arbitrage. We are blindly walking into a trap that has been set for all of human civilization. And in the next chapter, we will expose the sinister, unspoken mechanism of the great digital enclosure movement. Chapter 6. In this chapter, we aggressively tear away the glorious utopian facade of technological progress and plunge directly into the dark, historical mechanics of economic exploitation. We trace the insidious evolution of the rent-seeking business model from the feudal landlords who violently hoarded physical soil to the modern internet monopolies that hoarded digital traffic. Finally, we expose the ultimate, most terrifying enclosure movement in the entire history of human civilization, the brazen privatization of human consciousness. By absorbing centuries of collective human knowledge, our books, our open source code, our most intimate digital conversations into proprietary black box model weights, a handful of megacorporations have successfully erected a permanent toll booth over human thought itself, systematically transforming the global workforce into cognitive tenant farmers on our own intellectual land. We have spent the last few chapters marveling at the sheer, undeniable brilliance of the token economy. We have stood in absolute awe as the massive, howling winds of the remote Asian deserts were miraculously transformed into highly compressed digital intelligence, crossing oceans at the absolute speed of light to dominate global markets and crush traditional corporate structures. It feels like an unprecedented triumph, does it not? It feels as though we are standing at the absolute pinnacle of human technological liberation, ready to be freed from the chains of mundane, repetitive office labor. But if you strip away the dazzling, futuristic facade of artificial intelligence, if you look past the incredibly cheap token prices and the frictionless global trade, you will uncover an underlying economic mechanism so deeply sinister, so historically repetitive, that it will entirely shatter your optimistic view of the future. We are absolutely not stepping into a golden utopia of free intelligence and boundless human creativity. We are currently being blindfolded, pacified by convenience, and marched directly into the most massive, invisible enclosure movement in the entire history of human civilization. To truly understand the invisible trap that has been so perfectly set for us, we must take a brief, sobering journey back through time. We must confront a very old, very uncomfortable economic reality, the concept of systemic exploitation and the relentless extraction of surplus value. When you hear the word exploitation, your mind probably immediately jumps to a grim 19th century textile factory. You picture exhausted, malnourished workers coughing up coal dust on a dangerous assembly line, while the wealthy cigar-smoking industrialist comfortably pockets the massive difference between the actual value the workers physically created and the meager survival-level wages they received. The entire system of industrial capitalism was, at its very core, a highly efficient extraction machine. It relentlessly extracted the physical energy and the finite biological time of the human worker. But as human civilization evolved, the methodology of this extraction did not disappear. It became increasingly sophisticated, vastly more abstract, and dangerously invisible. The core underlying logic of the extraction machine remained perfectly intact. It simply kept changing its clothes to match the technological aesthetics of the era. Let us look even further back in time, deep into the agrarian roots of feudal society. I want you to imagine the classic, powerful feudal landlord. Ask yourself a very basic economic question. What actual, tangible value did the landlord physically create for society? The brutal historical truth is that he created absolutely nothing. He did not invent new, efficient farming techniques. He did not physically till the tough soil, and he certainly did not bleed and sweat under the scorching summer sun. He simply possessed a piece of paper, the legal, heavily enforced deed to the land. The peasant farmers, on the other hand, who were desperate to feed their families and simply survive another winter, had to break their backs on that land. They planted the seeds, they managed the irrigation, and they harvested the crops. And when the massive harvest was finally gathered after months of agonizing physical labor, the landlord simply sat in his comfortable, heavily guarded estate and took a massive unearned portion of the yield. His entire business model was based on a ruthless, unavoidable monopoly. If you wanted to live, you had to farm his earth. And if you farmed his earth, you had to pay him rent. It was not a voluntary, mutually beneficial exchange of goods in a free market. It was a mandatory, coercive toll extracted exactly at the critical choke point of human survival. Now, I want you to fast forward past the Industrial Revolution and look at our very recent past, the glorious, supposedly democratized era of the Internet. 20 years ago, we were passionately promised a decentralized digital utopia where anyone, anywhere, could freely build a business and reach the world. But what actually happened to that beautiful dream? A new, incredibly powerful breed of landlord rapidly emerged. This time, however, the land was not made of physical soil and dirt. The new, highly coveted land was digital traffic and human attention. If you wanted to open a digital storefront to sell your physical products, if you wanted your creative voice to be heard by a wider audience, or if you simply wanted your business to exist and be visible in the modern digital world, you had absolutely no choice but to build your entire livelihood on the proprietary platforms owned by the massive trillion-dollar internet monopolies. These tech giants essentially produced very few physical goods themselves. They did not manufacture the shoes, they did not write the articles, and they did not film the entertainment. They simply paved the digital roads, built the massive search algorithms, and legally owned the virtual land where the global traffic flowed. They sat at the central, unavoidable intersections of the internet and calmly collected the modern equivalent of feudal rent. You arrogant believed you were an independent, self-made entrepreneur building your own digital empire. But the harsh, undeniable reality was that you were just a modern digital peasant. You were farming on someone else's algorithmic land, paying them a massive, non-negotiable cut of your hard-earned profits simply for the privilege of being visible to the public. Every single economic era produces its own unique, devastating form of economic rent. In the feudal age, The rent was brutally extracted from the physical soil. In the industrial age, it was efficiently extracted from mechanical capital and human time. In the internet age, it was silently extracted from data flows, search rankings, and human attention. And now, the artificial intelligence agent, our quiet, tireless, highly efficient little digital crawfish, has arrived to aggressively claim the ultimate territory. It is here to collect rent on a completely new, infinitely more valuable piece of conceptual land. But to deeply understand what this new territory actually is, I must ask you a very profound, almost philosophical question. Think about the artificial intelligence model you use on your phone or your computer. How exactly did that little digital agent become so terrifyingly smart? How did it suddenly learn to write flawless, highly complex code, draft compelling, watertight legal arguments, and instantly analyze vast, chaotic financial charts? It was absolutely not born a genius. It was not the magical result of a single brilliant computer scientist sitting in a dark, isolated laboratory, writing a magical, self-aware algorithm entirely from scratch. No, this artificial brain was artificially, aggressively nourished. It was systematically, relentlessly fed. And what exactly was it fed? It was force-fed the entire accumulated intellectual heritage of the human race. I want you to pause and truly think about the sheer, mind-bending magnitude of what has been quietly consumed over the last few years. The model was trained on the deeply personal words you wrote in your forgotten blog 10 years ago. It consumed the historical records, the letters, and the wisdom written by your parents' generation, and the generation before them. It systematically devoured centuries of published literature, complex academic research papers, peer-reviewed scientific journals, intimate diary entries, heated philosophical debates, public forum arguments, and massive historical archives. Furthermore, and perhaps most importantly for the modern economy, it completely ingested the blood, sweat, and tears of the global software developer community. It consumed millions upon millions of lines of open-source code, painstakingly written by exhausted, highly caffeinated programmers in the dead of night, who shared their brilliant solutions freely with the world in the naive hope of building a better, open future. Every single brilliant thought, every tragic human story, every logical deduction, and every spark of raw human creativity ever recorded and uploaded to the internet was quietly sucked into the massive humming server farms owned by a very select few ultra-powerful technology corporations. Here is the most infuriating, heartbreaking truth of this entire technological revolution. Not a single word of that vast, incredibly valuable ocean of knowledge was actually written by those technology conglomerates. They did not write the timeless poems, they did not discover the foundational scientific principles, and they did not painstakingly code the underlying open-source libraries that run the internet. All of that profound intellectual wealth fundamentally belonged to humanity as a collective whole. It was our shared inheritance, but through the sheer brute force of massive capital and unprecedented computational power, those few corporations essentially took our collective history, aggressively compressed it, and permanently baked it into a deeply opaque, heavily guarded proprietary mathematical construct known as the model weights. The shared public intellectual property of the human species was magically transformed, practically overnight, into the exclusive, highly monetized, private asset of a handful of tech billionaires. And right now, the invisible trap has been completely perfectly sprung. Now, when you sit in your sterile office and want to access a synthesized piece of that exact same knowledge, when you ask the artificial intelligence to help you solve a complex problem, write a strategic report, or debug a piece of software, you are forced to pay them. You must pass through their proprietary digital toll booth. You must continuously consume their digital tokens, paying a direct financial cost for the privilege of accessing a processed algorithmic version of the exact same human knowledge that we collectively created in the first place. Does this underlying economic logic sound chillingly familiar to you now? It is the exact same predatory dynamic as the feudal landlord hoarding the physical soil and demanding crop yields. It is the exact same dynamic as the internet monopoly hoarding the digital traffic and demanding ad revenue. Only this time, the enclosure movement is not taking your physical land, and it is not taking your digital storefront. It has successfully enclosed the very essence of human cognition. They have successfully established a ruthless, unbreakable monopoly over the collective intelligence of our entire species. Every single time you type a prompt, every time you marvel at the machine's seemingly brilliant response, you are physically paying a cognitive toll to the new, untouchable lords of the digital realm. We must force ourselves to look at the reality of our situation with absolute, unflinching clarity. The technological advancements are genuinely breathtaking. The mathematical architecture of the neural networks is brilliant, and the hardware engineering required to build this massive infrastructure is a monumental achievement of human coordination. I am not denying the technological marvel, but as the entire intellectual legacy of the human race is quietly locked away behind a relentless paywall of token consumption, we are forced to confront a deeply terrifying existential question. In this glorious, highly anticipated new era of artificial intelligence, have we actually liberated ourselves from the drudgery of menial labor to pursue higher callings? Are we truly the absolute commanding masters of this incredible new technology? Or have we simply been stripped of our most valuable fundamental asset, our collective brainpower, and our shared history, only to be permanently relegated to the pathetic status of digital tenant farmers, forever condemned to pay cognitive rent to the cold, calculating masters of the machine? The silence of this impending economic collapse is deafening. The battle lines for the future of wealth have been entirely redrawn, not on geographic maps or ocean trade routes, but in the abstract, mathematical realm of computational power, server capacity, and token pricing. And in the next chapter, we will reveal exactly how this unprecedented cognitive monopoly is fundamentally rewriting the geopolitical warfare between the great superpowers of the world, shifting the ultimate battleground away from aircraft carriers and oil fields and directly into the beating, electric heart of the data centers. Chapter 7. In this chapter, we elevate our perspective from the individual tragedy of the displaced worker and the terrifying monopoly of the technology conglomerates to the absolute highest echelon of human competition, the grand chessboard of global superpowers. We completely dismantle the outdated, 20th century geopolitical mindset that remains obsessively focused on physical commodities, geographic choke points, and traditional energy reserves. By drawing a powerful historical parallel between the dominance of crude oil in the industrial age and the explosive rise of computational intelligence today, we reveal the ultimate, invisible battlefield of the 21st century. We expose how the true competition between great nations has quietly shifted to a desperate high-stakes war for token pricing power, proving that the token is not merely a technological metric, but the supreme, highly compressed digital energy that will brutally dictate the new world order. If you turn on any mainstream financial news network right now, or if you read the prestigious geopolitical analysis published by the traditional, legacy institutions, you will be bombarded with the exact same tired, incredibly outdated narratives. You will see highly paid analysts wearing expensive suits, standing in front of massive glowing maps of the world, furiously debating the movement of naval aircraft carriers, the complex fluctuations of global crude oil prices, the strategic vulnerability of the Strait of Malacca, and the endless, exhausting theater of physical trade tariffs. They speak with absolute unwavering confidence, entirely convinced that they are analyzing the cutting edge of global power dynamics. But I am here to tell you that they are completely hopelessly blind. They are using a crumbling 20th century map to navigate a terrifyingly advanced 21st century war. They are aggressively fighting the ghosts of the past, completely unaware that the actual living battle lines have already been entirely redrawn in a dimension they cannot even physically see. To understand the sheer magnitude of the geopolitical earthquake that is currently shaking the foundation of our world, we must first deeply analyze the historical anatomy of global hegemony. For well over a century, the absolute undisputed lifeblood of human civilization, the singular commodity that built empires, won catastrophic world wars, and dictated the rise and fall of entire national economies, was a thick, black, highly combustible liquid extracted from deep beneath the crust of the earth. Petroleum was the undisputed king of the industrial era. If a nation possessed oil, they possessed the power to move massive steel armies, to fuel the endless roaring engines of their manufacturing supply chains, and to physically conquer the globe. The entire geopolitical framework of the 20th century, The complex alliances, the brutal proxy wars, the aggressive military deployments in the Middle East was fundamentally constructed around one desperate, uncompromising objective: securing the uninterrupted physical flow of crude oil. The nation that successfully controlled the production of oil firmly commanded the strategic maritime shipping lanes to transport it, and ultimately dictated its global market price, held the absolute terrifying power to suffocate any rival economy on the planet. But right now, in this exact moment in history, the fundamental definition of what constitutes a core strategic resource has completely, irreversibly changed. Many people are still trapped in the old perspective, trying to understand international competition through the lens of traditional energy superpowers, fiercely fighting over oil fields, import tariffs, and heavy manufacturing. They are looking at the factory floor when the real power has already moved to the data center. The true, definitive new oil of our era has officially appeared, and it is absolutely not a black physical liquid. It does not require massive, vulnerable steel tankers to cross dangerous oceans, and it cannot be blockaded by a fleet of naval warships. The new petroleum is the token. The intense historical competition between the great superpowers, specifically the United States and China, has quietly, almost invisibly, shifted to a completely different battlefield. In the past, the ultimate struggle was violently fought over the physical control of petroleum, strategic maritime shipping routes, and traditional energy reserves. But today, the grand chessboard has been flipped entirely upside down. The ultimate geopolitical weapon is no longer the barrel of crude oil. It is the microscopic mathematical unit of artificial intelligence. Why is the token the ultimate weapon? Because, as we established in the previous chapters, the token is essentially a highly compressed, easily transportable digital package of raw electrical power. It is the magnificent, terrifying culmination of energy and intelligence perfectly fused together. In the old world, China was primarily known as a massive, sweating industrial nation, tirelessly exporting physical goods like clothing, household appliances, and electric vehicles to the rest of the world. In that old paradigm, they were constantly subjected to the friction of borders, the delays of customs, and the aggressive, politically motivated tariffs imposed by their geopolitical rivals. But in the era of artificial intelligence, a profound structural transformation is currently taking place. The very nature of the means of production is aggressively shifting away from physical material resources and moving directly toward pure, unadulterated computational power. The future of global competition is no longer simply about which nation can build the largest physical factories or which nation possesses the strongest traditional manufacturing capabilities. The ultimate metric of national dominance is now entirely based on which nation can successfully produce a massive volume of smarter, far more intelligent tokens at the absolute cheapest possible price. Imagine the terrifying strategic advantage of this new paradigm. By utilizing the incredibly cheap, abundant green energy generated in their remote western deserts electricity that can cost as little as 0.15 Chinese yuan per kilowatt hour, they are successfully bypassing the traditional vulnerable physical supply chains entirely. They are pumping that cheap, physical electricity directly into massive, humming clusters of graphics processing units, mathematically refining it into pure cognitive power, and instantly exporting that intelligence across the globe through submarine fiber optic cables. This is not just a clever technological trick, it is a fundamental redefinition of national sovereignty and economic gravity. In the industrial age, a nation exported physical commodities, but in the artificial intelligence age, a nation that successfully upgrades its infrastructure will export pure, synthesized intelligence. It is the monumental, historic transition from being a mere industrial nation to becoming a supreme intelligent computing state. And this brings us to the absolute core of the new global warfare, the supreme battle for pricing power. In any economic system, whoever commands the lowest cost of production inevitably dictates the rules of the entire market. Right now, Chinese artificial intelligence models are aggressively capturing global market share, not solely because of raw technological superiority, but because they have achieved a devastating, overwhelming advantage in the cost of producing tokens. They have successfully positioned themselves as the absolute global leaders in price-sensitive intelligence markets, systematically stripping away the pricing authority from the trillion-dollar technology monopolies of Silicon Valley. You must deeply understand the geopolitical gravity of this situation. The entity that successfully controls the massive underlying production of tokens aggressively dominates the fundamental cost structure, dictates the level of algorithmic intelligence, and ultimately holds the supreme pricing power of the token, is the entity that will absolutely master the new, definitive energy of this entire era. If a single nation can mathematically generate the equivalent of human cognitive thought at a fraction of a cent, while their global rivals are spending 10 times or 30 times more to generate the exact same intellectual output, the economic war is effectively over before a single physical shot is ever fired. The nation with the cheaper token will inevitably attract the global developers, power the global software infrastructure, and silently embed its proprietary algorithms into the foundational operating systems of the global economy. They will become the ultimate, inescapable digital utility for the entire planet. Just as the 20th century was brutally shaped by the nations that controlled the physical flow of oil, the 21st century will be entirely dominated by the entities that control the digital flow of cognitive tokens. The token is, without a single shadow of a doubt, the true, highly refined petroleum of the digital age. The invisible war is raging all around us, coursing silently through the fiber optic cables, buried beneath our feet and running across the floor of the oceans. The traditional palaces of power are crumbling, the old maps are completely useless, and the new empires are currently being forged in the blinding silent heat of the desert data centers. But as this new global order rapidly solidifies, as the intelligent computing states rise to claim their absolute dominance, what exactly happens to the millions of ordinary individuals caught in the crossfire of this monumental wealth transfer? In the next chapter, we will finally chart the exact actionable path of the money, dissecting the massive trillion-dollar investment logic that connects the digital interface on your phone directly to the howling wind turbines of the energy grid. Chapter 8. In this chapter, we pivot sharply from the abstract realms of geopolitical theory and cognitive philosophy, plunging directly into the brutal, highly actionable reality of the financial markets. We trace the exact unbroken path of the money, unveiling a highly complex trillion-dollar wealth mainline that connects the glowing pixels on your smartphone directly to the massive physical energy grids of the remote deserts. By meticulously dissecting the entire artificial intelligence supply chain, from the front-end software developers collecting cognitive rent to the midstream hardware manufacturers building the silicon brains, and finally down to the foundational green energy operators, we reveal the ultimate, inescapable investment logic of the next decade. The absolute end of artificial intelligence is raw computational power, and the absolute bedrock of computational power is physical electricity. We have stood at the edge of the digital abyss and watched the traditional carbon-based corporate world begin to collapse under its own biological inefficiency. We have witnessed the invisible, highly aggressive enclosure movement of human consciousness, and we have seen the grand geopolitical map completely redrawn in the blinding heat of the desert data centers. But I know exactly why you are still listening. You are not watching this simply to become a passive, enlightened philosopher of the new digital age. You are watching this because you want to know how to survive the impending economic slaughter, and more importantly, how to strategically position yourself in front of the greatest, most violent avalanche of wealth creation in human history. When the dust of this magnificent revolution finally settles, when the old empires are burned away and the new digital utility companies take the throne, where exactly does the capital flow? If we fully accept the premise that the token is the new, highly compressed digital petroleum, then we must logically and ruthlessly trace the entire physical supply chain of this new energy sector. This is not a single isolated stock pick or a fleeting software trend. It is an interconnected trillion-dollar wealth mainline. It is a massive, highly complex industrial transmission belt that stretches from the abstract, virtual interface on your computer screen, all the way down to the heavy, physical, howling wind turbines of the remote power grid. Let us systematically break down this massive wealth transfer, layer by layer, exactly the way a seasoned Wall Street analyst dissects a global supply chain. First, we must look at the absolute front end of the funnel, the toll collectors. These are the elite artificial intelligence model developers and the massive application programming interface providers. Every single time a software engineer in London asks for a block of code, or a financial analyst in Tokyo asks for a market summary, they must hit the enter key. The moment that key is pressed, these front-end companies collect a microscopic financial transaction. They are the new untouchable feudal landlords of the digital era, extracting their cognitive rent from the global workforce. However, the fundamental profitability of these front-end giants is not magically guaranteed. Their financial survival is entirely desperately dependent on one singular metric. They must keep their back-end inference costs devastatingly low, while simultaneously maximizing the total volume of tokens consumed globally. They are locked in a brutal race-to-the-bottom price war to capture the global developer market. And as they aggressively lower the price of intelligence, the global demand for token consumption will absolutely skyrocket, projected to multiply by hundreds of times before the end of the decade. But here is the critical pivot in our investment logic. To successfully process those trillions upon trillions of new tokens, the toll collectors require massive, incredibly expensive physical infrastructure. A software model cannot run on empty air. It requires heavy machinery. This brings us to the massive, immensely profitable midstream of the wealth mainline, the digital arms dealers. I want you to think about the sheer insatiable, almost terrifying global demand for raw computational hardware. We are talking about the advanced graphic processing unit manufacturers, the highly specialized semiconductor foundries, the designers of massive server racks, and the companies that build and operate the colossal data centers. History teaches us a very simple, yet incredibly reliable financial lesson. In the middle of a massive, chaotic gold rush, the absolute safest and most lucrative bet is almost never the wild-eyed miner desperately panning for gold in the river. The guaranteed winner is always the quiet, calculating merchant who manufactures and sells the highly specialized shovels, the pickaxes, and the heavy mining equipment. As the global token volume explodes, the demand for this advanced silicon hardware is currently experiencing a violent, unprecedented supercycle. These hardware giants are literally forging the physical silicon brains of the new global empire, and they are commanding astronomical premiums for their products. Yet, even as we marvel at the trillion-dollar valuations of the semiconductor giants, we must recognize a fundamental, inescapable physical ceiling. A silicon chip, no matter how incredibly advanced, no matter how infinitesimally small its transistors are, and no matter how mathematically brilliant its underlying architecture is designed, is ultimately nothing more than a very expensive, completely useless piece of dead sand without one critical, external element. It requires raw power. This leads us to the absolute undeniable bedrock of the entire token economy, the energy masters. We are finally at the very bottom of the supply chain, the place where the virtual world brutally collides with the physical laws of thermodynamics. We are talking about the massive green energy operators, the heavy infrastructure companies that physically manage the vast solar oceans and the terrifyingly large wind farms. But the future of this sector is not just about raw power generation, it is about highly intelligent, algorithmic distribution. The massive data centers required to run these artificial intelligence models run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, demanding a relentless, perfectly stable ocean of electricity. However, the wind does not always blow and the sun does not always shine. Therefore, the absolute most valuable companies at the base of this pyramid are the entities that design the smart grid dispatch systems. They are the brilliant engineers who build the software that can perfectly seamlessly synchronize the wildly fluctuating supply of natural green energy with the relentless unyielding demand of the artificial intelligence server farms. They are the true invisible gatekeepers of the future. This is the ultimate, inescapable investment logic that you must permanently burn into your mind. The absolute end of artificial intelligence is not a sophisticated conversational chatbot. It is not a beautifully generated digital painting, and it is not a clever software application. The absolute end of artificial intelligence is raw, brute force computational power. And the absolute, fundamental bottom layer of computational power is raw, physical electricity. When you truly internalize this massive vertical integration, the entire world looks entirely different. You immediately stop chasing the superficial, highly volatile software trends that distract the retail investors. You stop staring at the shiny interface, and you start looking deep beneath the floorboards, at the massive physical infrastructure required to sustain the illusion. You start aggressively researching the obscure utility companies that own the high-voltage transmission lines, the specialized engineering firms that design the complex liquid cooling systems for the server racks, and the real estate investment trusts that own the specific parcels of land where the hyperscale data centers must be physically constructed. I want you to think about this the next time you sit at your desk. Every single time you open a dialog box, type a simple line of text, and wait quietly for the machine to respond, you are personally initiating an incredible, massive physical chain reaction. That simple, seemingly weightless human interaction instantly triggers a massive surge of encrypted data that physically flies across the floor of the ocean. It ignites a massive cluster of servers, thousands of miles away, causing their industrial cooling fans to scream as the processors violently execute the complex mathematics. And at the very end of that long, invisible chain, the cold wind howling across a desolate, forgotten desert is physically harnessed, mathematically converted into a digital token, and fired straight back to your glowing screen. You are not simply using a software application. You are intimately interacting with the absolute most complex, highly compressed, and aggressively energy-intensive industrial supply chain that human civilization has ever successfully constructed. The investors who clearly understand how this massive chain actually works and who strategically position their capital at the critical physical choke points of this infrastructure will absolutely dictate the financial architecture of the next century. But as we prepare to reap the massive financial rewards of this new era, we must confront the final, ultimate question. In the next and final chapter, we will step back from the glowing stock charts and the geopolitical battlefields, and we will ask the one profound philosophical question that will define the ultimate fate of our species in the age of the machine. Chapter 9. In this final, definitive chapter, we step back from the frantic noise of the financial markets and the cold calculations of geopolitical warfare to confront the ultimate existential crisis of the 21st century. We entirely dismantle the naive, utopian belief that technology is a guaranteed liberator of the human spirit. By forcing the audience to look directly at the terrifying reality of the cognitive enclosure movement, we ask the most profound question of our era as human thought is aggressively industrialized and sold back to us by the kilowatt hour. What becomes of our intrinsic purpose? We end with a powerful, lingering philosophical challenge, forcing the viewer to decide whether they will remain a passive digital tenant farmer or actively fight for their intellectual sovereignty, culminating in a highly engaging, algorithm-boosting call to action. We have traveled a profoundly long and terrifyingly dark road today. We began our journey in the claustrophobic, brilliantly lit confines of a modern corporate cubicle, watching an invisible, tireless digital entity systematically dismantle a business hierarchy that took humanity over 400 years to build. We then flew across the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, standing in the howling, desolate deserts of Western China to witness the physical transmutation of wasted, stranded electricity into pure, unadulterated digital intelligence. We ruthlessly dissected the trillion-dollar supply chains. We exposed the invisible, rent-seeking monopolies of the technology titans, and we completely redrew the map of global geopolitical dominance. But as the dust finally begins to settle on this magnificent, brutal revolution, we must collectively pause. We must step away from the glowing green stock charts, mute the frantic, greedy shouting of the Wall Street analysts, and confront the deafening, terrifying silence of our own future. For the past century, human civilization has been entirely obsessed with one singular, intoxicating religion, the religion of absolute, uncompromising efficiency. We worshipped fiercely at the altar of productivity. We genuinely, naively believed that if we could just invent a machine powerful enough to take over our physical and menial labor, we would finally be truly free. We told ourselves beautiful, comforting lies. We thought that by outsourcing the grueling, repetitive tasks of the industrial age, we would automatically elevate our entire species to a much higher plane of existence. We dreamed of a utopian era where every single human being could spend their days writing poetry, exploring the vast mysteries of the cosmos, or indulging in deep, uninterrupted philosophical thought. We fundamentally believed that technology was the ultimate guaranteed liberator of the human spirit, but the arrival of the token economy has violently shattered that beautiful illusion. The artificial intelligence agent did not just automate our physical muscles, it successfully, ruthlessly, and perfectly automated our cognitive brains. When you look closely at the terrifying efficiency of the new atomized company, you do not see a liberated human being pursuing artistic perfection or higher meaning. You see one or two exhausted carbon-based managers frantically acting as stressed dispatchers for a massive, invisible army of tireless digital agents. We have absolutely not been elevated above the machine. Instead, we have been completely inescapably embedded within its relentless mathematical operational logic. We are no longer the brilliant, commanding architects of the future. We have been reduced to mere biological prompts, acting only as the organic catalysts required to initiate the next massive wave of automated token consumption. I need you to deeply, painfully consider the true, spiritual cost of this unprecedented digital enclosure movement. Think about what actually happens when the sum total of human knowledge, our greatest literature, our darkest historical tragedies, our most intimate emotional letters, and our finest open-source code is permanently locked away inside the proprietary, black box weights of a trillion-dollar language model. What happens to the intrinsic, undeniable value of human experience? If a cold, unfeeling machine can mathematically generate a perfectly empathetic apology, a stunningly beautiful watercolor painting, or a flawlessly reasoned legal defense in a fraction of a second, burning less than 2 cents of desert electricity to do so, then what is the actual market value of your personal, agonizing, biological struggle to learn those skills? We are dangerously, terrifyingly close to creating a global society where the vast majority of human beings are permanently reduced to the pathetic status of cognitive tenant farmers. If we remain blindly passive, we will wake up every single morning, log on to digital platforms we absolutely do not own, and utilize artificial intelligence models trained on our own stolen, collective history. We will pay a continuous, inescapable stream of cognitive rent to the incredibly small handful of digital warlords who control the massive computing centers and the physical energy grids. We will be beautifully entertained by algorithms, perfectly managed by intelligent agents, and ultimately entirely irrelevant to the continued progression of the world. This brings us to the ultimate existential question that every single person watching this video must desperately ask themselves right at this very moment. It is a question that goes far, far beyond your retirement portfolio, the price of semiconductor stocks, or the shifting balance of global geopolitical dominance. In a new world where the calculation of the machine is infinitely cheaper, infinitely faster, and infinitely more efficient than the agonizing, slow, biologically flawed process of human thought, what is the fundamental purpose of the human mind? Are we tragically destined to become the pampered, obsolete pets of our own magnificent digital creations, completely surrendering our free will and our agency to the cold mathematical perfection of the token? Or will we find a way to violently, passionately reclaim our intellectual sovereignty, absolutely refusing to let our collective human consciousness be permanently metered, commodified, and sold back to us by the kilowatt hour? The window of opportunity to decide our ultimate fate is closing rapidly. The massive wind turbines in the remote desert are spinning faster every single day. The sun is constantly beating down on the endless oceans of solar panels, and the deep submarine fiber optic cables are violently humming with the relentless flow of the new digital petroleum. You can choose to close this video right now, go back to your comfortable office cubicle tomorrow morning, and pretend that the old carbon-based world is still perfectly intact. But I promise you, the digital water is already rising around your feet. Before you leave, I want you to scroll down into the comments section and answer this one highly controversial, deeply polarizing question. In exactly 10 years, will artificial intelligence be universally remembered as the ultimate tool that finally liberated your true human potential? Or will it be remembered as the perfect, invisible cage that permanently enslaved your mind? Let me know exactly what you think. Argue with each other and lay your predictions on the line, because the algorithms are definitely watching our every move. If this deep dive challenged your perspective, if it completely shattered the comfortable, outdated illusions you held about the future of the global economy, then do not just walk away and let the internet distract you. Hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and join this dedicated community of free thinkers and strategic investors, because the foundational rules of the world are about to be entirely rewritten. And on this channel, we will absolutely not be left behind in the dark. Stay sharp, guard your mind, and I will see you in the next one.